Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. I have with me, as you all can see, Professor Madhav Nalapat, who's going to show us a little light as to what is this latest thing. Actually, not latest. What is this little trend that walks around in China, which is called Xi Jinping Thought? Would you believe the fact that people are doing PhDs, masters, and their bachelors in this particular ideology? And here we are, who make funny nicknames of Xi Jinping's. What is this Xi Jinping thought all about? How does this impact the foreign policy of China, its policy towards India? And does he even realize that it is the same thought that is bringing him or China to the forte that he is today? Firstly, sir, thank you so much for joining me this evening. And I know you have a book to show us. I'm eager to show it on the platform. So please do take it away and let us know what this book is and when is it coming out, sir.
Well, the book is called Cold War 2.0. And yes, I mean, it is right here in front of me. And it's coming out by the 28th of this month. So by the middle of September, it should be in bookstores all over. And frankly, this has been going on for some time. But Xi Jinping has basically, conscientized people by his actions and by his thought. And so more and more people understand that this is what is going on. So, I mean, before about 4 or 5 years ago, no, very few people would really appreciate that there was a new Cold War, and they thought it was just scaremongering and things like that. But today, more and more, this particular concept, the particular reality, is now getting mainstreamed in the public eye, and in the big democracies like the US and India, etc., it's getting mainstreamed in the public. So I think from that point of view, we owe General Secretary Xi Jinping a favor for being transparent about what the Chinese Communist Party is up to, and not hiding his strengths and biding his time, showing his strengths and frankly saying, now is my time. So, in that sense, he's done us all a big favor by exposing the reality of Cold War 2.0.
So there was an old Chinese proverb that said that never ask the enemy's emperor the weight of his cauldrons. This guy is not even asking. He's saying, "Give me the measurements, give me the height, weight, the size, the location, everything." He's put out his intentions, which is contrary to everything that one learns about Chinese philosophy. It's completely contrary. How do you kind of understand that, sir? Right at the beginning, I'd like to ask you.
Look, I'd like to point out, and that is a common mistake we all make, and a mistake that the CCP leadership has actually encouraged and fostered in its info war and in its information campaigns, identifying the Chinese people with the Chinese Communist Party. The fact is, the Communist Party, you have a hard core of around 90 million people who are members. The active membership is about half of that. But if you call them, formal nominal members, it's about 90 million in a population of almost 1.4 billion. That's all. Within that, about 70% are junior level cadre. Then you take another 20%, it is medium, 25% is medium level cadre. So the top 10%, you have the top 10%, there you have the top 1%, and then you have the top 1% of the 1%, and the top 1% of the 1% of the 1%. Every one of these populations actually is chemically, if you look at sociological trends, psychology, society, societal behavior as a kind of a chemical reaction and combination. Every one of these subpopulations is different from each other. The non-communist members, the non-communist citizens of China are different from the communist citizens. The senior leadership of the Communist Party, of the middle level leadership, is different from the lower level leadership, as I said, the bottom 70%. The middle level, it's about, let's say, 20%, as I said. The higher level, the top 10%, is different from the middle level, very different from the bottom level, which itself is very different from the general population. And then you go to that 1%, 1%, 1% range.
Mm.
So don't forget, Xi Jinping belongs to that rarity. He's not 1%, he's one. He is the Communist Party of China's general secretary. And he is in the mold of Mao Zedong, which basically is the mold of, absolute authority over the Chinese Communist Party. So Xi Jinping is not 1%. Xi Jinping is one. So you look at his chemistry, you look at his psychology, you look at his societal values, so to speak, his attitude, it's completely different even from the rest of his party, even from other senior members of his party. And that is what makes the difference where Xi Jinping thought is concerned. Xi Jinping thought is not about ancient Chinese philosophy, although he has very cleverly brought that in because he understands that the Chinese people still respect the fact that they are an ancient culture, and he's reaching out to all of that. It basically represents an entirely new, if I may say so, way of thinking. A way of thinking which was born about 101 or 100, 102 years ago when the CCP was born. And this way of thinking is very different from the traditional Chinese culture. Mao Zedong recognized that, and he saw the ubiquity of Chinese culture. So the entire cultural revolution was not only to destroy his enemies in the party, which was practically 90% of the top leadership, but also to destroy anything that was culturally there before him. So he did a pretty good job of it during the Cultural Revolution. I don't think Chinese culture, traditional Chinese culture, has ever come back. It has not really recovered from the Cultural Revolution. And so when you look at Xi Jinping thought and you say, well, it's different from traditional Chinese culture, the answer is, of course.
I mean, the most interesting thing is that they're promoting one thing and actually giving something else, and that's something which is very weird to me. So this whole idea of bringing in a Xi Jinping thought, which is being publicized, and today I believe all the professors and bankers and business heads have been encouraged, in quotes, to learn the Xi Jinping thought. Uh, what is it all about? Uh, is it about creating a new China? Is it about actually fixing his hegemony over China, or is it about cementing the future of China? What is it that you would like to attribute it to?
Look, Xi Jinping is an individual who, I mean, he has gone back to the age of Mao Zedong.
Mhm.
His role model is Mao Zedong. It's certainly not Deng Xiaoping at all. It's certainly not Hu Jintao, his predecessor, or Jiang Zemin, not in the least. It is Mao. And Mao was Mao. And one thing he did was expand the boundaries of China, classical China, by double. He added Tibet, he added Xinjiang, he added Inner Mongolia, he added Manchuria, he stopped at Taiwan because of Taiwan Straits and the American issue there. But he basically annexed all these territories, and today what you call Greater China, which is the current PRC, is the construct of Mao Zedong. So Xi Jinping is, in a sense, not only emulating Mao, but competing with him. And when you compete with him, basically, you have to show that in history, you have done more for China. And when they say China, they mean Communist China. For them, the nation is the 90 million members of the party. The rest of the nation, I mean, the party is the nation. So he has to do more. So you have a very big task ahead of you if you want to do more than what Mao did. And that is where you come into this question of aggressive behavior towards India, all kinds of boundary disputes, sea, air, land, space disputes with different countries. And with, I think, about at last count, 11 or 12 countries he had disputes of one kind or the other with. And that is as a consequence, frankly, of him competing with Mao Zedong and Mao Zedong's legacy. His intent is to make his legacy, in a sense, transcend Mao's legacy. And we had Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, if you remember. In China, they used to call it Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought. Now, how much of classic Marxism there is, how much of classic Leninism there is, I think very little. Actually, there is more of Stalinism, if you ask me, than there is of either Leninism or Marxism. And Stalinism was essentially a statist bureaucratic concept. It was not really a political ideology. It was an ideology of control of the population, control of the governance system, control over society, control over all the levers of society. It was basically a means of control. That was Stalinism. So if you talk in terms of that, I would say, Stalinism, Mao Zedong thought, would have been a better fit than Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought. So Xi Jinping wants to basically make his thought. So you have Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, Xi Jinping thought. So he wants to be the fourth leg of that particular chair or table, and that is his intention.
I mean, it's like becoming. I don't refer him to as the chairman of all things in China. I call him the emperor of China. So that's something which the Chinese, the whole setup with the mandate from heaven and this and that relates to. Sir, the Xi Jinping thought today, when you look at the on ground implementation of his glorious values, if I may, in quotes, uh, is a very interesting thing, because when we see the people that he has himself chosen to implement his thoughts, what we see is that he's not happy with the people, and he's firing them left, right, and center within just about a year of him being re-anointed. What does that tell you about the implementation of the so-called Xi Jinping thought amongst his own loyalists close to him?
First of all, the people who you call as loyalists are people who are essentially a blank slate where ideology is concerned. You have people in their uh, early 40s, early 50s. Those are the kind of people that are there. And Xi Jinping wants to write on that blank slate and fill it with his ideas and his thought. Those are the kind of people he has brought forward. Stalin also did the same essentially. You are not allowed to have any idea of your own except an idea cleared by the Vost, the leader, that was Stalin. Now, it's interesting because you're talking about this, because you know very well that you had Jinrong, the foreign minister of China, and he suddenly disappeared. He disappeared from view. Now you have a lot of people in the military who have now been removed or have disappeared. People are seeing this as an assertion by Xi Jinping and what you had said. That look, he's not happy with the people he has chosen. I have a slightly different take on it, and I had that take as soon as I heard about Mr. Chin's disappearance, so to speak. He was typical. The former foreign minister was typical of the Xi Jinping people. He was essentially a non ideological bureaucrat. Previously, you had non ideological technocrats. Now, technocrats are those who are, engineering, various other technical skills, and they put them in front of governance. For a classic bureaucrat, what he is interested in is essentially, uh, you know, um, the control systems. the process. And that is the kind of individual whom Xi Jinping wants, because he wants a control over the process, and he wants himself to direct that process, and then to have people who can blindly follow that process. In a way, it's similar to, I mean, one reason why he's so partial towards the military is that it's supposed to be in the military thinking, yours to do on, and that's it, to follow the instructions, to follow orders. And if your orders take you, up a mountain cliff, the orders take you into hail of fire, well, so be it. Those are my orders. I'm going to follow them. I'm going to, try and get up that mountain. And we did that very frankly, very bravely in Kargil, if you ask me, at the sacrifice of some of our bravest people. We reconquered the Kargil heights. Go into the line of fire. And our soldiers have done that multiple times in multiple situations of conflict. So, in that sense, he's partial to the military because it reflects what his view is of an ideal governance system. You have an all seeing, all thinking, self sufficient in terms of idea and ideology leader. And then the leader has a bunch of blank slates on whom he writes. The former foreign minister was a blank slate on Xi Jinping wrote extensively. There is nothing on record to suggest that he had any difference of opinion with what was written in his, what I would call his policy space by Xi Jinping. He was a blind follower of Xi Jinping. If Xi Jinping had asked him to change his line completely, he would have done it. If Xi Jinping had asked him to do something else, he would have done it. A completely loyal person. So the question is, why was he removed? And in my view, he was removed not as a sign of strength by Xi Jinping, but as the first sign that there could be a weaknesses in Xi Jinping's hold over the Communist Party of China. What you're seeing in the military also, several individuals who basically were promoted, hyper promoted by him, are now gone back. Now you have Wang Yi, the new foreign minister. The difference between Qin and Wang is that Qin was essentially a Xi Jinping man. Wang is a party man.
Yeah.
He's a CCP man. You can't call him a Xi Jinping man. He was not a blank slate. He had a lot of stuff already in his mind space. He may be looking at Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping may have overwritten on some other points, but he was not a blank slate at all. And he is very much a party man. So, in my view, this is the first visible crack in the absolute control that Xi Jinping had over the party, in the Mao like control that he had over the party. And this is my interpretation of the situation. And this, again, as I said, puts the entire dynamic in a much more unstable situation, because we don't know where this equilibrium is finally going to play out. But in my reckoning, finally, the party machinery, the party leadership, the 1% is revolting in a sense and saying, no, the one will not be only the one, he'll have to be one plus. And I think this particular set of actions that you're talking about, hardcore Xi Jinping followers being removed, I'm not sure it's a sign of Xi Jinping who is willing to do this. I think it's the first sign that there is a weakening of Xi Jinping's authority, and the 1% is now, in a sense, saying, hold on, we should be the guys in charge and not just you. We don't want to go back to the age of Mao Zedong.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, sir. Just about 2 days after all that happened, when they had that national conference and they put Wang Yi back and all that, the State Council put out a statement saying that, any excesses to the private sector must be reported to us, and any misbehavior by state machinery must be reported to us, and it shall be taken up very, very carefully. This is completely contrary to common prosperity, which, by the way, is just gone gayab from their talking points and this and that. It's just finished. Not seen that anymore. How do you see state council? Not a small piece of machinery within China. So how do you see that development?
Well, the state council is the heart of the party, if I may say so. And Xi Jinping has done his level best to completely to create his own cultural revolution. If I may say so, cultural revolution by stealth, and replace a lot of people. But clearly, he has not been successful enough. Clearly, individuals have been successful in hiding their, in biding their time and hiding their strength, so to speak. They're following Deng Xiaoping's very wise counsel. And
Hmm.
that's what's happened. I mean, frankly, the kind of treatment meted out to to Jiang Zemin faction basically is responsible for Xi Jinping coming to office. The Hu Jintao faction wanted somebody else. Hu Jintao, definitely wanted not Xi Jinping, but somebody else, possibly his premier to come. And it would have been a very different situation had he come. I'm not saying different in terms of the trajectory of China. Please understand one thing: the trajectory of the CCP in terms of expansionism, in terms of control, that would continue no matter who had come.
Hmm.
But the speed of the trajectory, the the form of the
Arrogance.
trajectory, and the transparency of the trajectory would have been very, very different. So, in that sense, Xi Jinping has done us a very big favor by being so open about his acceleration of speed, by his, by revealing the trajectory, the direction of the trajectory, by revealing the intent of the CCP, and by basically owning it up. So, in that sense, he's done the world a favor. There's now absolutely no running away from this particular fact. 3 years ago, yes. 5 years
Hmm.
ago, definitely. I mean, 3 years ago, a penguin would not have published this book, I can tell you. They would have said, sorry, we can't publish it. Today, they published it, and the reason is because the world is waking up to this reality. And if I may say so, we have Comrade Xi to thank for making this reality so transparent, because he has been as transparent as Mao Zedong. We always talk in terms of the Chinese being very untransparent. Mao Zedong was very transparent. I mean, his activities on the border, Aksai Chin, his nasty comments on Indian leadership, on India, all these kind of things that are out there in the open. He didn't hide anything. He was transparent about his desire to get close to the United States. He was transparent post Stalin. He didn't dare to be transparent during Stalin's time because he knew very well that that could end in a very short life for him. But after Stalin, when Khrushchev came, and he knew Khrushchev was not the kind of man that Stalin was, there would be no blowback. Let's put it this way. Khrushchev was a dog that would bark but would not bite. There's really a very small bite, a very soft bite, and a very loud bark. So Mao was very open about the split with the Soviet Union, about the Soviet revisionists, and he kept abusing them. And in fact, way back, he wanted to come closer to the United States. But throughout the 1960s, that didn't happen because the Americans didn't get the cue. Americans are, frankly, if you like America, unless you put a placard around your neck saying, I love America, they don't understand it. You understand? I mean, you know, they're very demonstrative people. So the Chinese, they're not subtle at all, quite frankly. But the what I'm trying to get at essentially is that this situation, very frankly, is something that has been planned by the CCP, which is making itself once again the Middle Kingdom. It's not just Xi Jinping. Hu Jintao, it was actually Hu Jintao who began the transformation of China into a modern technological power, especially in his second term. Hu Jintao did that. I was told in one of my visits to China, and I'd like to say I've always gone there at the at the invitation of the Communist Party, because if you don't go to China on a Communist Party invite, what you see are the tourist spots, and then you come back and you see the hotel room card and your menu, and that's about it. You really don't understand what is going on. So, I mean, the party in that sense has, in a sense, is China. Today's China is basically, you can say it's identical to the party, because the rest of the country simply has no relevance. It's the party and only the party that has got relevance. So, coming back to that, I'd like to say that Xi Jinping is no admirer of Jiang. He's no admirer of Hu Jintao, but it's Hu Jintao who began to ensure that China started manufacturing high-end technology. In Jiang's time, China was very happy. In Deng's time, China was very happy to be the factory of the world and
Hmm.
to manufacture other people's gadgets and widgets. I'm told Hu Jintao went up an elevator and he looked at everything and said, "My God, all this is foreign. Why can't we do it ourselves?" And that was about his first or second year of his 10-year term. And from then on, he started an aggressive campaign of Make in China. And that has been put on steroids by Xi Jinping, except that it's not just Make in China, it's controlled by the CCP leadership. Now, the difference between Xi Jinping and Deng Xiaoping, or even Mao Zedong, is the degree of control. Mao Zedong, you can say, was a control freak. People called him that. In
Hmm.
some senses, he was. But the reality is that if he liked you, he gave you a tremendous amount of authority. You could do exactly what you wanted, so long as as you said, you had the emperor basically smiling at you. Now, in China, for example, emperors are seen as very cruel people. Mao was very cruel. Xi Jinping has been fairly cruel. And all the leaders of China, including Deng, you look at Tiananmen, they've all been very cruel. But the Chinese people, for them, emperors are remote, aloof, cruel people. It's a different culture from in India, where you need our leaders to go on road shows to make themselves seen, to make themselves accessible. That's not the case in China. Emperors were remote, aloof, and cruel. And today's leadership is remote, aloof, and cruel. And that is, again, a difference between classic China and communist China, if I may say so. But coming back to, Mao gave a lot of freedom. In the case of Xi Jinping, that freedom has been taken away. Increasingly, there is a centralization of authority, a centralization in the office of the General Secretary. And this is having its impact on China as an economic machine, because economy needs autonomy. Economy needs a certain degree of freedom, and economy above all needs freedom from fear. One very good thing that Prime Minister Modi has done over the past few months is decriminalize a whole raft of laws. Now, when you criminalize a law, you create fear. And fear in the mind of an entrepreneur, it drains him of the oxygen needed to be creative. One. Two, when you have taxation at fairly steep levels, you have a low tax base. It's not an accident that we have a low tax base, because if you look at the taxation level, you've got this tax, that tax, here tax, sales tax, provincial tax, all kinds of other things. And more importantly, a whole lot of that was technically criminal. If your accountant made a mistake, you could go to jail. You could be locked up. You could be in a judicial process for 20 years, because who looks at figures? I mean, I certainly don't. I mean, I rely on. Fortunately, I got a very good accountant, a very very good accountant. I mean, frankly, your doctor and your accountant, you have to have people whom you can trust completely. And I have a very good accountant. I must confess, I have two very good doctors as well. But that's going into that. So the point is very, very simply that Xi Jinping has in his thought control is the number one priority. And he feels that without control, China can grow only under complete control, a suffocating degree of control by the CCP leadership, by that 1%, and by that one dominating the 1% and dominating the remaining 99% and the remainder of the population. So that is having its impact on the economy. You're seeing Alibaba, you're seeing in technology, and you're seeing. Secondly, he's it's I mean the party has been quite transparent about the fact that it's a Han nationalist party. The Han people are the superior people of the world, according to the party. The, what do I say? The unwritten constitution of the party. Don't go by the written constitution, the unwritten constitution. And whether it was Mao, whether it is Jiang, whether it is Hu Jintao, Xi Jinping, they all believe in this Han, supremacy, and that's why, for example, the other ethnicities, Tibetan, Uyghur, Manchurian, Mongolian, they've all got to basically learn to think and act like Han, intermarry with Han, and in a sense get absorbed into Han culture, because that is supposed to be the culture of the Communist Party. Now, and from that point of view, the centrality of Han becoming once again the top ethnic group in the world. The Chinese believe that the white population, the European population, their time is now over. Only they don't realize that their time is over. And it's now time for the Han to step in to that. When I say Chinese again, I mean the leadership. It's a shorthand for the leadership. And so, from that point of view, this is Xi Jinping's view as well. This is the view of the entire party, but this is Xi Jinping's view as well. So, when we say, oh, the problem is Xi Jinping, sorry, it's not Xi Jinping. The problem is the CCP and the CCP's way of thinking. The tactics may be different, the strategies may be different. The objective is the same, and the objective is make China once again the Middle Kingdom. And when you have the Middle Kingdom, you have what is called the Jimmy system, Jimmy system. And the Jimmy system was a tributary system in which you had individuals who were kings of nearby territories. They had palaces, they had courtiers, they had all the trappings of power, and they had one or two Chinese in their court who basically were the masters. They would give the orders. All these trappings, all these courtiers, they would all mill around, have a great time, but the instructions were given by these handful of Han Chinese who were there. And this was the Jimmy system of imperial China. So you had imperial China and you have the tributary kingdoms. And so in the CCP, they have adopted the Jimmy system. So for them, an ally is a tributary. The Russians are now finding out what that means in Central Asia now. The Chinese are saying, hold on, we run the whole world, we run you. Forget about Central Asia. And the Russians are, but unfortunately, the Americans and the Europeans have given them no choice. In that sense, you had Vivek Ramaswamy, that US presidential candidate, saying very clearly the first thing he would do if he were elected president was go to Moscow and try to get Moscow on the United States side against China. And believe me, that would be immensely popular with the Russian people, I can assure you, because
Mhm.
I don't think they have great regard for the Communist Party of China at all. They have as much regard as Mao had for the Communist Party of Soviet Union, during Khrushchev and Brezhnev. But having said that, I just want to say Xi Jinping has not altered objectives. He has altered strategy. He has maybe changed a lot of the tactics. He has changed the atmospherics. He has changed the ambient noise. But the
Mm.
objectives of the CCP have been from the start what it was. And that is why it is important to understand that this is the reality. In fact, we have been facing this reality, in my view, from 1997 onwards. With the Hong Kong handover, the Chinese Communist Party thought, now it's our turn. You know, till now, it's been the turn of the European and European race people. Once they were forced to withdraw from Hong Kong in disgrace, as the way they saw it, and the PLA marched into Hong Kong, from that time, our time has come. And frankly, from that time, Cold War 2.0 dawned, except that it has
Mm.
taken a very, very long time for those who are the targets of this Cold War to realize it. And frankly, I wrote, there were two books that I wrote in quick succession. One was 75 Years of Indian Foreign Policy, in which I called for India and the United States in particular to work together. There was a lot of criticism of me as being pro American. You look at some of my writing, and people will be surprised. Obviously, they haven't read it. And then this book, Cold War 2.0, has two bookends. The why you needed to have an alliance of the democracies, and why? Because of Cold War 2.0. So these are the two bookends. My first book, 75 Years of Indian Foreign Policy, in August, last August. In between, I got a book called Geopolitics of the 21st Century by Manipal Universal Press, which has got a complete, compendium of writings on 21st century geopolitics. And you go through that, and then you go through the reality of Cold War 2.0. So frankly, what Xi Jinping has done, he has done all of us a big favor. He has made it Cold War 2.0 deniers difficult to hide. He has made it difficult for the CCP to hide its fundamental objective of recovering the status of the Middle Kingdom and enshrining the Han as the dominant ethnicity in the world. So I think from that point of view, General Secretary Xi, and let me be respectful of him and let me give him his title, General Secretary Xi has done all of us a favor. And the reason why, I wrote the second book was not to provoke a war. I know that's going to be, oh, this guy's a warmonger. No, to prevent a war. We could not avoid a war in the first half of the 20th century. We went through two world wars. Today, we are back in the 1930s. And, 10 years early, but we are back in the 1930s. And in that situation, if I may say so, we have to understand what's going on and respond correctly in a way that the great powers did not do in the 1930s and made World War II inevitable. This book
Inevitable.
is to ensure that World War III does not become inevitable.
Can I ask you two questions out of this thing, sir? One is that you've focused a lot about the Han supremacy, if I may term it like that. Uh, they the Chinese people are not Hans, all of them. What happens to the rest of them? That's point number one. And the second part that I'd like to ask you is, why would they come out and say their timelines? Was it arrogance? Was it supremacy? Was it, I'm there, I can do what I want to, you know, or just a lack of simple understanding?
Look, I told you very clearly that in the CCP lexicon, sinicize means to harmonize. So all these other nationalities, ethnicities have to come into the melting pot of the Han and become Han. And it's helped, and the Han are helped by the fact it's not really an ethnicity, but so far as it is a culture, a Han culture, a traditional kind of civilization. Of course, it's been badly battered under, under CCP rule, but it's there. And from that point of view, the other ethnicities have got to fall in line. That's why their education, their upbringing, intermarriages, everything is to basically go into the melting pot and create a good Han out of a Tibetan, an Uyghur, a Manchurian, or a Mongolian, or whatever, or any of the other Hui and and other nationalities. So that is basically the point. And so why they Xi Jinping revealed this timeline because he thought China, could do it. He didn't realize that China is so entirely dependent on the whole world. He looked around him and he looked at the immense achievements of China. He looked at the immense wealth of China. He looked at the economy of China, the rate of growth, and he assumed a linear progression, you know. And he said, well, our time has come. As I said, in 1997 itself, in my view, the CCP thought their time had come. But they obeyed Deng's advice, they bided their time, hid their strength, grew their strength. In Xi Jinping's time, you're not biding your time, you're not hiding your strength, you're coming straight out, full face, and saying, this is what we want, and I'm telling it to you because you can do nothing about it. And frankly, when you look at the way he's established control over the South China Sea, for example, unchallenged virtually,
Mhm.
well, there are some sectors in which that has happened. Hopefully, in other sectors, that's not going to happen. He's trying to do that in Africa, he's trying to do that in Latin America, he's trying to do that in the Eurasian continent. But but now the blowback has come. And now he's meeting resistance. In India, for example, that resistance was there on the part of our soldiers at Galwan, where he met tremendous resistance. And that really
Mhm.
was a great, unpleasant surprise for the CCP and for the PLA and for the Central Military Commission that the Indian soldier could fight so well, frankly. But the reality is, he went ahead with that because he thought he could get away with it. Let's say, for example, I think I can, take away something from you and get away with it. You can't do a thing about it. Well, I'll say, hey, look, I've got it. And basically laugh in your face. Because don't forget, I'm the emperor. I'm a cruel person. And may I say that that is a tradition, that respects that kind of cruelty. In China, I mean, I'm not talking again of traditional China, I'm talking about present day China,
Yeah, yeah.
where you have, let's say, for example, a big guy is beating up a small guy. In many parts of the world, the small guy will get the sympathy. In China, in several instances, the small guy gets ridiculed and the big guy gets the admiration. That's the way the culture has developed under the CCP. And they have made them into, frankly, that kind of an attitude that this belongs to us, we'll grab it, we'll take control of it anyhow. We'll use social media, we'll go into the health sphere, we'll go into the question of agriculture, we'll go into society, we'll go into widening fault lines, we'll go into hybrid warfare, but we'll take control of it. And that is the point. This in the CCP culture, the strong are respected, the weak is despised. And morality, frankly, comes entirely into it, not at all. Is the exact opposite of Mahatma Gandhi's thought. Mahatma Gandhi said, means are everything. Even if I don't achieve any of my ends, it doesn't matter. I have to use the right means. The exact opposite of that is means are nothing. I can use whatever means I like, it's the end that counts.
That's interesting, and that's probably what tells you why they steal stuff from around the world in terms of IP rights and
Technology.
stuff like that. My last question to you, sir, and it's I could talk to you about this whole day because the kind of information that you get giving us is it's amazing. So, but my last one to you is about the factor that somewhere down the line, and we've discussed two instances where he's gotten a certain amount of pushback, a very subtle pushback, and this subtle pushback came out in Chinese media itself. Chingang is something. Of course, he could have just said he's sick and put out a couple of photographs of him in the hospital getting some treatment, but he had to come out with the reality. He had to face the fact that the state council said something. Now, how does this game go forward? How does Xi Jinping unravel?
Look, There were efforts at getting rid of Mao. It didn't work. There were efforts at getting rid of Stalin. It
Yeah.
didn't work. There were efforts at getting rid of a lot of such individuals. It didn't work. If you go back to, if you go back to Germany, for example, uh, I mean, right up to the end, right up to his suicide, the fanaticism with which the bulk of the German people followed a person called Adolf Hitler, who did all kinds of unspeakable things, was amazing. Talented, cultured people. So, frankly, I would not. I would not even say Xi Jinping is down. I would only
Hmm.
say the party has stepped in. Why? Because they like his objectives, but they feel his tactics may not be and always the best. So they want to get into the picture and frame out better tactics. It's not really an attack on Xi Jinping as General Secretary. It's more an attack on some of his tactics. And, Mr. Chin was, as you said, a wolf warrior par
Hmm.
excellence. He used to, abuse everybody roundly and with the full approval of his master Xi
Yeah.
Jinping. He was 100%, the voice of Xi Jinping, and he was suddenly gone. And then you have Wang Yi, who frankly is much more dangerous because Wang Yi has the same objectives as Chingang, absolutely the same. Don't have make any mistake about that. Whether it's territory, whether it's control, whether it's aggression, whether it's expansionism, Wang Yi doesn't have one micro millimeter of difference between Mr. Chin. The only thing is he's very subtle about it. So you may not even realize what he's talking about. And that makes him a much more dangerous person. And I think the party is now trying to make Xi Jinping, the people around Xi Jinping, look less dangerous to the outside world because they've suddenly woken up to the reality that dear Mr. The General Secretary may have acted at least 5 years too soon, if not 10 years too soon, in revealing the CCP's hand. Again, I tell you, not Xi Jinping's hand, CCP's hand too prematurely. I think they're going to try for that kind of a camouflage system, but again, you have a reality situation. And the reality is the party, modern China, does not want to accept, uh, the control of the top echelon of the Communist Party. And therefore, the risk of a foreign adventure is in fact higher now with a weakened Xi Jinping than it was previously. Where Taiwan is concerned, where other issues are concerned, the risk is in fact much higher, in my view, of something
Yeah.
like that happening because the party will now lead to get legitimacy in some way. Is doing badly in economics, not likely to do better. Is doing badly in diplomacy, not likely to do better. I don't think Wang Yi is going to persuade too many people that there's been sudden, hey presto, China has suddenly become a Gandhian country, from a Maoist country to a Gandhian country. I'm sorry. I think no one is going to fall for that. But, from that point of view, Taiwan, for example, I think the situation regarding Taiwan, they are delighted by the Ukraine war. If you remember, are the two or three things. One, I opposed the purchase of S-400 from the very beginning. I said Russia is a good friend. It should always remain a friend. We should buy from Russia, buy Russian oil, buy Russian resources, but not Russian defense items, certainly not the S-400. And today, what's happening? Deliveries have stopped. I hate to say I told you so, but I did tell you so. And of course, at that point in time, I don't blame the government because the Americans didn't come forward.
Yeah.
Donald Trump's problem is that, the only love he believes in, I've said this before, is paid sex. If there's no money, there's no love
Yeah. Yeah.
in Donald Trump's mind. So there was no offer of THAAD. If the Americans had offered to set up THAAD during Donald Trump's time, and that too, not even on concessional terms, should be given free of cost. Because setting up a THAAD, for example, in the Andamans or in some other locations in India, would have boosted US and Indo Pacific security fantastically. No, that offer was not there. It was never there. And even Joe Biden, he's not talking about THAAD. He's not talking about giving it away to India. He's throwing money at Ukraine. He's not throwing any money at Taiwan. Taiwan is paying top dollar for every single bit of equipment that it's buying. And it's buying a measly amount of equipment when you compare with the flood of equipment that Ukraine is getting.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't believe it's because Biden is a racist and that Biden feels that white people are people who are more important than people of a different complexion. I don't believe that. I don't think the Bidens are racist at all. But frankly, the kind Ukraine is a second or third, not even a second or third or fourth class security issue for the US.
Yeah.
Taiwan is the number one security issue for the US. India, defending the Himalayas, defending the Indo Pacific. These are number one security priorities. How many weapons has the United States given to India free of cost? Zero. How many weapons have been given to Ukraine at cost? Zero. How many weapons have been given to Taiwan free of cost? Zero. I mean, what kind of priority is this? Wake up, Europeans. Wake up, Americans. You're in a different situation. It's no longer Russia. It's China. It's no longer the Atlantic. It's the Indo Pacific. It's no longer Europe. It's Asia. Wake up from this old hangover of Cold War 1.2. Because if you don't wake up from that hangover, you're making World War III inevitable. And World War III will not be only with Russia. It will be with the country that is now, in a sense, increasingly asserting its dominance over Russia, and in the Indo Pacific. So you're going to, by your own lack of understanding of the reality of Cold War 2.0, you're going to make World War III inevitable. And again, I want to close by saying I wrote this book because I don't think it's inevitable. I don't think World War II was inevitable. It could have been stopped in 34, 35, 36,
Yeah.
37, 38, 39. It could have been stopped in 39 at much less cost. It was not stopped. It went on to 40. And luckily in 1941, you had Franklin Roosevelt in the White House, and he had a deal with Stalin. If you had some, less brilliant individual in the White House, oh, no, 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 we'll leave the Soviet Union to stew in its own juice. Hitler could possibly have got control over resources. Stalin would probably not have been able to throw him out, and the war would have continued for 2.5 years longer at the cost of millions of Allied lives. Luckily, you had this. And today, I'm delighted to say, in Vivek Ramaswamy, you have an American politician who's saying out loud, Donald Trump also, frankly, give him credit, except for this problem, obsession with getting money out of everything. And that is a huge problem with Donald Trump. For him, everything is in dollar signs. And that's friendship is also in dollar signs. And that's why he's surrounded by billionaires. But the reality is, quite frankly, that you have to wake up to the reality that your real security challenge is with China. That you have to help the countries that are confronting China, including the only country that has frankly, been involved in kinetic combat with China. Because the Chinese
Even a
do kinetic
pushback.
combat only after they completely destroy a country. They haven't destroyed India, they haven't destroyed the United States, they're working on it. But we have gone into a kinetic conflict and we have held our own. Our soldiers have held our own. Our leadership has held its own. And I can only tell you one thing, that it is not too late to prevent World War III, but in a few years' time, it will be.
On that note, sir, I must say this has been an eye opening discussion because hearing from you about China and, of course, global geopolitics is always very interesting and a learning experience. I hope your book is extremely successful, sir, and wish you all the best for yourself, your health, and your future endeavors. I would love to see you back on the platform as soon as possible for another insightful discussion, sir. Till then, Jai Hind. Thank you very much.
Jai Hind. Jai Hind.